Late autumn settles over the valley, the green of summer giving way to gold and brown, the air thinner now, edged with the promise of cold. At the January farm, where the land has been carved and reshaped by months of relentless work, stands Ethan Jr., his boots planted firmly in soil that no longer resembles what it once was. Beside him, old Ethan watches the same ground, though his attention is fixed not on the work itself, but on the patterns that led them here. Nearby, Mason and Joshua move through a growing network of wagon paths and the decaying railroad track under repair, directing others with quiet confidence, their place in this new world no longer uncertain. At the edge of the clearing, Caleb and Zion stand together, their eyes moving between the workers and the distant tree lines beyond. Juan tightens the rigging on a reinforced wagon, built not for harvest, but for weight. And a few paces back, Tony stands with his hands resting loosely at his sides, watching it all unfold with a look that is no longer casual. Behind them, stacked, lined, and carefully covered, are containers, barrels, tanks, metal and plastic vessels of every kind, more than anyone expected. It didn't happen all at once. It couldn't have. By the time the leaves began to turn, old Ethan's wall was no longer a theory. It was a record. 7 red X's, each one marked, confirmed, visited, each one a place where something had fallen out of the sky and stayed there, intact. They didn't talk about it in town, not in full. Instead, the story stayed simple. Scavenger hunts, a phrase repeated often enough to become truth. But the work behind it was anything but simple. The fuel came first, in small amounts. What could be carried, what could be dragged, what could be poured into whatever container they had on hand. Barrels, cans, old tanks, pulled from vehicles that would never run again. At first, it was manageable. Then, it wasn't. The terrain fought them. Soft ground, steep inclines, paths that were never meant to carry that kind of weight. More than once, they lost entire loads to tipped wagons and broken axles. More than once, they nearly lost people. But they didn't stop, because with each trip, the reality became clearer. They had something no one else had, and, if they were careful, something no one else even knew existed. The wagons changed first, reinforced, widened, stabilized for terrain that shifted under pressure. Then the paths, cleared, flattened, redirected. Not roads, but something closer. And finally, the idea that had been forming quietly for months began to take shape, not to reach the wrecks, but to pass them, to connect something larger, the railroad. At the January farm, the work took on a new urgency. What had once been a clearing project became something organized, structured, a system. Short sections of rail began to appear, laid carefully across the most stable stretches of land. Not continuous, not complete, but enough to change what was possible. Mason and Joshua found themselves at the center of it, their experience with the CVRR no longer theoretical. They understood weight, balance, movement. They understood how things traveled. Bruce visited often now, bringing knowledge, advice, the occasional piece of salvaged equipment, and wagon loads of found steel rail that made the impossible feel just slightly more within reach. "You're not building a line," he told them once. He looked out, across the uneven rails, the wagons, the workers. "You're building a reason for one." That stayed with them, because it was true. The jet fuel wasn't just fuel, it was leverage. Back in Allen, the changes were quieter, but deeper. Clothing that didn't wear out, tools that didn't break, materials that could be repaired instead of replaced. Meg's sewing circle became something more than a place for mending. It became distribution, quiet, careful. Lives improved in ways that were hard to trace back to any single source. And in some cases, lives were saved. Illness treated with supplies that shouldn't exist anymore. Injuries managed with tools no one had seen in years. No one asked too many questions because no one wanted the answers to be taken away. At the motel, the wall continued to grow. More markings, more notes, more certainty. Old Ethan stood before it often now, no longer searching, but confirming. They were all along the routes, he said one evening. The others gathered behind him. Coming in, going out, he traced the lines again, and we're right in the middle of it. So what you're saying is, we're sitting on the middle of the sky. No one corrected him, because that's exactly what it felt like. Later, outside the library, Zion sat with another book in his hands. Same look, same tension. Caleb joined him again. You still don't like it? Zion shook his head. I don't trust it. He closed the book. They're writing it like it was always going this way. Caleb leaned back slightly. Maybe they need it to. Zion looked out across the town. Yeah, that's what worries me. Across the square, Holly moved more slowly now, one hand resting instinctively against her stomach. It was no longer something that could be missed. Bobby worked nearby, actually working this time. Not pretending, not drifting. He didn't look at her often, but when he did, it was different. Back at the farm, under a sky that darkened earlier each day, Ethan Jr. and old Ethan stood near the edge of the growing line. Behind them, the containers sat in quiet rows, too many to count at a glance, too much to ignore. You think anyone else knows? Ethan Jr. asked. Old Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked out past the trees, past the valley. No, he said finally. Not yet. The wind moved through the clearing, cold now, persistent. And if they do? Ethan Jr. asked. Old Ethan's expression didn't change. They will. They always do. In the distance, far beyond the reach of the valley, something shifted. Not seen, not heard clearly, but felt, like the world itself was beginning to take notice.